right, well, welcome everyone. Glad everybody could be here for this afternoon. This week is going to be a little bit more practical or hands-on, I think, in terms of just some of the information we're going to cover off. But I wanted to show you this next slide just because I was able to generate an AI picture that's supposed to be me doing this budgeting seminar. And it was just kind of fun. It just was one of these things. It just takes pictures. You can put whatever words you want into it, like budgeting or finance or whatever. And it makes a picture of me with, anyways, I thought it was kind of funny. So if you weren't here last week, just a little bit about me. I just had a real interest in teaching about finances for some time. Completed some financial coach training. I did some master's research in biblical financial stewardship at seminary. I've been teaching budgeting and also do some self-directed investing for myself, obviously, and for some of my family as well. So let's talk a little bit about emotions related to finance. But let me first just say, some of you may know, but over the last, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 months, I've dropped a little bit of weight. And that's because I got on a budget and cut our food spending, like, no, it had nothing to do with the budget, okay. I'm just kidding, it is true that I have lost some weight. But what I noticed, what the Lord showed me through the process of losing some of that weight was the emotional side to eating and food that I had. And the connection in my love for sugar, like that was evident. But it was like even social things, like you'd go, eating out wasn't really much fun because I didn't eat everything that was there. And it's like you're paying a lot of money for this. Yeah, there was a lot of emotions tied to food. And so how hard it was even to start just to say no. But then, how hard it was to continue to say no. And so these social aspects I talked about, going to other people's places, I'm already picky as it is. Some people know, but let alone throw in only eating specific things. And so, it was just a little bit challenging. But it made me realize that there are some strong connections with food and with the emotions. And then it made me think about, well, how is that tied to finances as well? Because I think there's some pretty strong emotions tied to how we spend money, how we think about investing, and what happens when things happen in the investment world. And so what emotions do you experience around money? Anything that you can think of in terms of any emotions that you might experience as a result of finances or possessions or money?
Guilt.
Yeah?
Yeah, definitely. Like just feeling wealthy when you get paid and being like frugal when you don't have much money, and then when you get paid again, you're like, woo, let's buy something.
Yeah. So it kind of fluctuates a little bit, right? Yeah. Yeah, anyone else?
Guilt.
Guilt. Okay, in what regard?
Like spending on myself as opposed to family or something that we're choosing.
Okay, I could see that for sure. Yeah, lots of little ones around, and you're spending on yourself, and you're thinking, oh, sure, yeah.
I'm going to say anger.
Anger, okay.
I have to pay for stuff that I don't want to pay for. That costs a lot, and like yesterday, I had to dip into my savings account for something that I really didn't want to pay for.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't me that, like you're in the sermon this morning, said things happen that aren't your fault.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That happens to me every day as a parent. There's all these things that these kids keep doing that I had nothing to do with, although we did raise them. So I guess we have some responsibility. But I could see, for sure, like torn between, having to part with money, possessions, and that sort of thing when we don't really feel like it was our responsibility. Yeah?
Fear.
Fear, okay.
When there's not enough.
When there's not enough. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And those are all great. My grandpa, he grew up in the Depression, so you can imagine how the emotional side to possessions for him later in life, he saved everything. Every pair of underwear was a rag. Like he wasn't a hoarder in like today's sense of hoarders, where it's like a mental illness. But he definitely didn't throw anything out. My grandma had to go do that, and she'd just try and clear things out, and he'd be picking it out of the garbage, right? Like, it's just, but he grew up in a time where they didn't have much. And so that shaped him emotionally. His relationship with money and possessions changed as a result of when he grew up. I had a friend of mine who grew up, he's a little bit older than I am, but he had mentioned to me just this past week, and I asked him if I could share it. He says yes. But he grew up, single mom, like they grew up poor, didn't have much, but he said when he was older and married and they had a bunch of kids, they put a pool in their backyard. And they had, he said, I felt guilty and unworthy of having a pool for probably the first 3 years they owned the pool. He said, because pools are for rich people, and I'm not rich, right? He just said he had to work through that a little bit because of the emotions of growing up, how he grew up. He didn't feel like he deserved a pool, or that this was only for the rich, that type of thing. So, so there's definitely emotions that leads to behaviors that don't always match knowledge or wisdom. Okay, so the emotions tied to, giving you an example that's not related to finances, but doctors and nurses who smoke, they know the effects of smoking, but yet they still do it. It's like a financial advisor who claims bankruptcy, right? Like, they're supposed to be the ones directing on how to handle finances, but it happens. Sometimes they don't take their own advice. You think about like Black Friday in 1929 when the stock market crashed and people are literally jumping out of windows, killing themselves because they think they've lost everything. And so that's not rational. Like, people's emotions led them to behaviors that didn't always match the wisdom or knowledge that they should have had. And that's when, sometimes people will say, well, I'll buy when I'm stressed, but I'm going to buy when I'm happy too. This is just pretty much I'm going to buy all the time, right? Or the opposite. Some people never spend, so they never spend and never spend and never spend and are frugal and so it can work both ways, right? But that's why a plan that we talked about last week a little bit about a budget is key to help you to say yes to certain things and to say no to other things. Having that plan of financial goals to help keep you and your emotions in check. And that's why we have a plan, and that's why we have goals, and we set these goals rationally, hopefully, and then we can walk through those emotions at different times. When we have lots of money in the bank and when we don't have money near the end of, before we get paid again, we can work through that, and it kind of helps us out. But I just thought I'd throw that in there because it's something that I worked through recently that I thought it's exciting and thinking about how that related to finances. All right, so let's take a quick look at some investing options. So priorities investing. If you're at the stage where you are investing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later of kind of the process if we looked at the Ramsey's baby steps for kind of prioritizing, but generally if you're going to invest, especially if it's retirement related, if you have a match from your employer, that's your best option because that's 100%. So if you put in, the employer might say to you, well, if you put in $10,000 or a percentage, generally more so than a dollar figure, if you put in 5%, we will match 5%. Okay, that's great because that's 100%. You're putting in 5,000 and they're going to give you 5,000. So match is generally the first option. Then I usually would suggest to go to a TFSA, so a tax-free savings account, or a first home savings account, which is new, depending on your circumstance and situation. Then an RRSP, and then you could just do straight out what's called a margin account, where you're just investing and you're paying like you're taxed on your growth and such. So that's kind of the idea. If you were to wonder where do I put my money first, I would say if your employer matches, I would say that, and then I would fill up my TFSA, and we're going to talk about that in a second of how much you can have for each of these accounts. But then if you have kids, you might want to consider the RESP also, which is an education savings plan. And there, again, there's little rules if you know. The government will contribute 20%, so basically $500. If you put $2,500 in, they're going to give you a grant of $500 for the first $2,500 each year per child. And so that's $500. It's $7,200 over the course of your kids growing up. Is 72? That doesn't factor, right? I forget. It's something similar to that, where you're gonna be able to do that for up to 18 years for them. Maybe there's a lifetime maximum of 7,200 or something like that. That makes me think of that number. So, question. This was a question last week that Cheryl had asked about cashing out RESPs for students and the best way to approach that. Is that a lump sum? Okay, so with that question, there's 3 types of money in an RESP account. How many people would have an RESP set up for kids? Did? Yeah. Okay, so a few. So there's 3 types of money in the RESP account. There's the contributions that you make, grandparents make, anybody can make almost, into that account. So those are the contributions. Those are after-tax dollars because you don't get a tax benefit by giving to an RESP. So you have your contributions section. Then you have your government grants, like I just talked about, the 20% that they'll give you back. That's the Canada Education Savings Grant. If you're in a lower income, you can sometimes get a Canada Learning Bond that gets thrown in there too. But you have basically this pool of government grant money. And then the third one is the growth. So hopefully you put it in something and the money just doesn't stay the same. It actually grows and you're going to make money. So over the course of, let's say, 18 years, your child that you're putting into that, hopefully it's not just what you put into it. In the end, it's going to grow. And so there's the growth portion. So those are the 3 types of money in the account. But really there's only 2 pools that they draw from, which is the contributions, and there's technical words for that. It's the post-secondary education, the PSE portion, which is getting a little technical. But basically there's 2 pools. There's your contributions, and then there is the other section, which is your educational assistant payments. Those are taxable. That's the growth and the grants. And so when a student draws on their RESP savings, and it is the student that is going to have to pay tax on this, not the parents or the grandparents or whoever contributed, it's the student who receives the money for their education. They're the ones that have to claim the money they receive as income, only on the growth in the grant section. The contribution section, so that PSE portion, you don't pay tax on that because you didn't get a tax advantage putting it in there, if that makes sense. All they need is proof of enrollment, and you can withdraw that. You can draw any amount of the contribution, but you can only, I mentioned last week that you could only withdraw 5,000, it's actually 8,000. So 8,000 of the growth in grants in the first 13 weeks of their education. So once 13 weeks has passed, you can pull out more after that. So all that to say, for the question here is, what's the best way to do that? I think the best answer to that is when you need the money, right? If you need the money, then that's the best time to take it out. Is there some tax advantages? If you pull it out in September, it's going to be taxed in that year, obviously, for the first semester. School starts in September for most post-secondary educations. If you pull it out in January, obviously it's going to get taxed in that year in January, so you're going to wait a whole year to get taxed on that for the student. So if you wanted to, if the student is making a lot of money, like let's say they're on a really good co-op and they're making a lot, or they're a doctor and they're on an internship or where they're actually making a lot of money, then maybe you want to pull out the contribution side as opposed to getting taxed more. And then there's a time where maybe you're in school for 8 months and you only have a 4-month co-op or something like that, so you're making less money, then maybe you pull out on the grant side in the growth. So there is some tax advantages to think through with that. So in terms of lump sum or not, it's if you need the money, pull the money out and utilize it. And hopefully you're in a plan, if you have multiple kids, that it's a family plan. I would recommend that so that if one child doesn't use it, then one of the other children can use that money. All right. Does that make sense? Is it was too technical in terms of some of it there, or not enough?
If you do have your kids in individual plans and you wanted to switch to family plan, is that something you can do after the fact, or is it something that
I'm certain. I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure, but I know that you can set up a family plan at any age. Like you don't have to set this up when they're born, and that's the only thing. You have to they have to track that though, because if you had multiple financial advisors and you set up RESPs in multiple places, then you have to track kind of how much money that you've put in. But I would ask your financial advisor what it looks like to make a family plan, so that it would kind of combine it all into one. because then whatever kid, like if one kid chooses not to go to university, you don't want to have to pay back or pay tax on the growth or what have you. They will claw back all the grants. They will claw that back for sure, but you will have made some money, hopefully, over the years. But if they don't go to school, it's better to try and pass it on to another child. But I don't know the exact answer on that. You'd have to ask a financial advisor if you could set up a family one now and then, or convert it into a family plan. Yeah. All right, so some of the other investing options are an RRSP, which is pretty common, that most people might be aware of a registered retirement savings plan. And I don't know if we can see that chart very well.
No.
It's all right. Okay, so your tax-free savings account, your first home savings account, your registered education savings plan, which is the RRSP we just talked about, and a RIF, which is a retirement income fund. So the RIF, you're going to have to move your RRSPs over to a RIF by the end of your 71st birthday. For those of you who are in that category, it has to happen then. The RIF, if somebody's getting RIF payments now, they basically work off of a percentage of the amount that you have in your RIF, and it increases the older you get. So it starts probably around 4%, depending on your age is how they calculate the percentage. And it's 4 to 5%, and then it kind of gets a little steeper the older you get, because they want you pulling the money out and getting taxed on it while you're alive, or so that they could, because basically an RRSP, when you buy an RRSP, you're taking the tax that you would have paid today or this year, and you're moving it, hopefully, it's tax deferred for a number of years until you're older. And the idea is you put it into an RRSP because maybe you make more money now than you will when you're retired. And so if you're in a higher tax bracket now, you defer that income to when you're older and retired when you don't have an income or less of an income. And then you pull it out then, so you gain the tax advantage by deferring it for that many years, and then also being in a lower tax bracket, which isn't always the case. Some people stockpile so much money that they have a lot of money in the end, and you're paying a high amount of tax anyways. But that's the goal of the RRSP, is to take money now, reduce your income. So if you made $100,000 and you put $10,000 into RRSPs of the year, you would have paid tax likely if you're employed, from your employer on $100,000. But when you go to do your taxes, they're going to take that $10,000 off that you put in your RRSP. So you only are accountable for paying tax on $90,000, which you've probably overpaid now, and you're going to get some back when you do your income tax. So that's how the RRSPs work. The tax-free savings account is a little different. When you put into a tax-free, and please, a tax-free savings account does not mean it is a bank savings account, okay? If you have a tax-free savings account and it's at a bank and it's in just a savings account, unless you have a really good reason for it to be there, like you're getting ready to use it real soon and you want to put it in something that's not going to fluctuate anymore, you could move it to something conservative like a bank account. But if you hope to earn money in your tax-free savings account, please put it into exchange-traded funds, mutual funds. It's not a savings account in the sense that you have to have it at a bank making like next to no interest. So you can buy stocks, you can buy bonds, you can buy exchange-traded funds, you can buy mutual funds, all within your tax-free savings. And you should have it in something other than a savings account at a bank. Okay, so it's a bit of a misnomer, but the idea of a tax-free savings account is that you take your $100,000 you made, and you can't put $10,000 in. This year, this chart is wrong. You can actually put $7,000 in 2024. 2024, you could put $7,000 into a tax-free savings account. And what that does, the benefit of the tax-free savings account is you make $100,000, you put $7,000 in, you're still paying tax on $100,000 because you're putting after-tax dollars into the tax-free savings account. So you don't get a benefit come tax time that you overpaid. But what happens is everything in that account, the growth that happens in that account, you don't pay tax on the end. So that's why I would say matching first, because that's 100% growth. If your employer is going to match you and you're not matching what they're offering, then I would say put your money into matching. Then I would say put it into a tax-free savings account, because especially if you're young. And I'm going to show you a chart for you young people and all of us older people who go, man, we should have invested years ago. If you put it in the tax-free savings account now, it has so much time to grow and the potential for that, and you will not pay tax on that growth, which is amazing because the government takes money all the time on everything they can. So to be able to have something grow tax-free so that you will not be taxed later. So if you put in 7,000 and 10 years from now it's worth 12,000 and you have to pull that out, that 12,000 is yours. There's no tax on it. So that's the beauty of the tax-free. That's why I'd say, because there's a limited amount for tax-free, that's why I would say put it in that next. So the first home savings account applies to people who want to buy their first home. There's a couple qualifications in order to be able to open this account. You can't have owned a home, I think, in the last 4 years. And so,
Just on the tax-free savings account,
yep,
it's 7,000 every year, but it's cumulative from when the program started 8-10 years ago, so it's probably close to 100,000 we
Yeah.
put in there now.
yeah, it is
So
over
if you
100,000
didn't
now.
have a tax-free savings account started, and you had 100 grand you wanted to put in there, you could take that whole 100 grand and put it in, and then, as you say, you get a good stock, and you're working $1 million in 70 years.
Yeah. So it's a dynamite program. If you listen to the Ramsey show, that's called a Roth IRA in the States. If you ever hear them talking about a Roth, put it in a Roth IRA. That's what they're talking about. It's the same sort of tax-free savings account that we have. The first home savings account is the best of the tax-free and the RRSP. So this is why this is a great account. If you are looking to buy a house, it only applies to certain people. But I'll tell you, I had my boys open up these first home savings accounts because they're, as you know, housing prices have gone up and it's going to be harder and harder for our young people to buy houses. It will. So if we can help them out, if I can contribute a little bit to that, or they contribute to it, what it does is when the year you open it, you have 15 years to buy a house. You can put in $8,000 a year. And when you put in $8,000, so let's take our $100,000 income because it's just an easy number to work with, and you put $8,000 into the first home savings account, then it deducts your income like an RRSP, right? So now you only made $92,000 accordingly on come tax time, but that $8,000 grows tax-free like a tax-free savings account. So that $8,000, when you go to take it out later, if it's now worth $12,000, you don't pay any tax on it. So you get the tax benefit from putting it in, and it grows tax-free. So it's got the best of both. Like it's if you qualify for it and you hope to buy a home within 15 years, that is definitely where I would put money. Up to a maximum of 40,000. So you can only do 8,000 for 5 years. The maximum of 40,000. But if you put 40,000 in there for 5 years and let it grow for another 5 years, depending on what you're invested in, maybe that's worth 60 or more, right? So
What happens if you don't buy a home?
So if you don't buy a home, it will roll into an RRSP. So then RRSP, and you will have to pay tax on it. So you get the tax advantage if you buy a home in Canada. Can't buy a home in the States. Buy a home in Canada, then you can take that out tax-free, and it has to be put onto a home. And so husband, wife, both can have one. And you can both put it on the same house. So that's an option too. But yeah, so if it doesn't get used within 15 years, it moves over to your RSP.
And then what's the minimum age for that?
18.
18.
Yeah. 18 for a first home. Let's just see. Yep, between 18 and 71 who qualifies. Yeah.
Tax-free is the same.
Tax rate is the same. Yeah, 18, yeah.
So is that cumulative also, or is that a definite only 8,000 a year?
It's only 8,000 a year when you apply, because it's not the same of when the program started, and it started actually in 2023. I think the end of 2023. I heard about it last year, But as soon as you open your account, that starts the time for the 15 years to buy the house. So that's why it's not cumulative back. You get 40,000, but as soon as you open it, you get 8,000 a year for the next 5 years. Yeah.
What if you aren't able to if they're not able to put 8,000 in that year, and say they can put 4,000 this year, can they make the difference up the following year?
Yes. Yeah.
They can.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be cumulative that way. Yeah. As soon as you start it. Yeah. So that's yeah. Go ahead.
So I have a question about, you mentioned something about if your TFSAs are not with the bank. What did you mean by that?
So when you say savings account, what do you think of?
A bank.
You think of a bank, right?
Yeah.
You think of putting money in the bank. You might have a checking account and you have a savings account. Most savings account at banks don't make very much interest at all. So if you were to invest in the bank by putting it in a savings account, you're not going to make any money. You're actually losing money with inflation. So what I mean is, like, there are self-directed brokerages where you can buy stock. You can buy all of these at, like, Quest Trade, for example, or Wealthsimple, or at a bank or at a brokerage. Yeah.
We have one at CIBC, it's called CIBC's Investors Edge. It's a separate account, like for a tax-free savings account. So we have some investments specifically in that.
Yeah. So banks have the capability. So what I really am hoping that you'll get is that you don't put it in a savings account at a bank. If you have it at a bank, put it into an investment account where you can buy, like I said, exchange traded funds. You can buy individual stocks. You can buy mutual funds, where you're actually going to invest in something that's got a likelihood of having a greater return than just a savings account. If I'm, is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
what's next?
Yeah. So it's not that the bank is the problem. It's the bank account that most people think of as a savings account. That's the problem. It's finding the investment accounts within the banks or within some of these other brokerages, and utilizing that so that you can earn more money with that money. Okay, and the RIF, if you're on a RIF, you can take out more money than the prescribed percentage each year, but you just have to claim that as income. And so lots of times for those who are earning the RIF money, if you're not making, I'd have to look up the number specifically, somewhere around 80 or so, or 90, somewhere in there, they'll start a clawback on your old age security. So lots of times you're planning for how much money to take out. If you're below that with your percentage that you're required to take out, if you took out, like, let's say you wanted to buy a boat and it was $80,000 and you wanted to pull that from your retirement income, you're going to set yourself over the limit. They're going to claw back your OAS next year so that you're not going to get that $9,000-ish from OAS. So when you're planning for that, that's what you kind of have to look at those levels if you're in retirement income mode. And sometimes people are just plain simple over that, so they're not going to get the OAS anyways. But you're paying tax, so like you still have to do an income tax, and you still pay tax because you're pulling money that you got tax deferred under your RSP, which rolled over to a RIF when you got old enough, and so you're going to have to pay tax on the money coming out. So, yeah. So one of the questions was, what's the best way to invest for future retirement, and are there Christian investment organizations that are more in keeping with Christian values? So, best way to invest, I would suggest, is slow and steady wins the race. Invest early, the earlier the better. So I want to use a little scenario here, and then I'll get back to answering that question specifically. But if you put away a little bit by a little bit, that was one of the passages last week in Proverbs, you just keep putting little by little and it's going to grow. You get exposure to the market at various times, so you might buy when it's high. If the market dips a little bit, you're going to buy while it's low, and it starts to go back up again. You're going to buy. If you consistently buy on a monthly basis, then you're going to buy according to the market, right? And in the American S&P 500, which is like the 500 top companies the index that follows that, it's grown roughly over 8% a year for the last, on average, over the last like 50 years. 8%, and sometimes more. Like last year was a really good year for the TSX. It was up, I think, close to 20% or over 20%. A lot of the stocks were over 20-some%. So, but on average, it's about 8% if you follow the top companies. So if you put in at different times, you're going to catch the market at different times. You're just going to follow the market, and so you get an 8% return. That's pretty good. But that's slow and steady wins the race. It's boring, but boring is good. All right? It's not flashy. It's not dynamic. You know, you're not buying Donald Trump meme coins that have lost 80% of their value. Prior to inauguration, he set these coins out. It's like a cryptocurrency, but it's like, they call it a meme coin because Donald Trump puts it out. And other people put them out too. But
His wife did one too.
Yeah,
Bitcoin.
and hers is down 94%. Yeah, so, yeah, like they're just, it's like kind of like fad. Don't get into that. Just leave them alone. So let's just take this little example to strive to invest early. The earlier the better. And I pumped these numbers into good old ChatGPT, which was absolutely wonderful. Because I just gave them my formula. So scenario number 1 is, if you invested $7,000 a year, which is the current TFSA amount, so you're 18 years old, you can just open your first TFSA, and you put $7,000, the maximum amount, for the next 10 years. Every year you put in $7,000. Now that will probably go up, but we're just going to say it's going to stay the same, okay? They do increase the amounts we can put in from time to time. So right now it's 7,000, so let's just stick with that for simplicity. So you're making 7,000 a year for 10 years, from 18 to 27, basically. Then you stop contributing, and you don't contribute again until you retire. Let's say you retire at 65, okay? Averaging an annual return of 8%. So I don't know if I've confused you yet or if you're still with me. You're 18 years old, 7,000 a year for the 10 years, then you stop contributing, so you've invested $70,000, right? 7,000 for 10 years. So I took that number and I wanted to know how much we would have at 65. Then the second scenario is, how much would you have at 65 if you started contributing at 28? So picking up where the other person left off, you wait 10 years to start investing because you're spending it on all kinds of other things, eating out, whatever. So you start at 28. Now's the time I got to get into my TFSA. And so you start at 28 and you contribute $7,000 a year until you're 65. Not for 10 years, for 37 years. That's $259,000 that you're investing, okay? Starting at 28 till you're 65. All right, how many guesses? Well, I got the number up there. Come on. I haven't quite figured out in Keynote how to just tap it so it just pops up. So I'm just giving you everything. Can you imagine? Scenario 1. If you invest $70,000, but you invest early, the key is early. You're going to have over $2 million. You invest for 10 years, then you stop. At 65, you have over $2 million. Now, it would be honestly really hard to not touch that money because things in life will come up where you're like, oh, I'm going to just spend that money. But if you didn't, you'd have over $2 million at 8% annual return. Compared to the second scenario, where you invested from 28 till 65 and you actually put in $259,000 of your own money, and your investment's only going to be worth $1.5 million because you waited 10 years. So those 10 years, like investing early has huge dividends because it allows that money to compound. And as it gets going, it just starts cranking it out, especially at the end, it's really cranking it out. And so the best way to invest is to invest early, slow and steady and as young as possible. So I have talked to my kids and they have not taken my advice. And I've said to them, like, just if you can scrounge up $7,000, right? Now is the time. Put it in. and just watch it grow.
Realistically though, that's really hard for that age group.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because they're buying their first car, they're going to school, they're, you know.
Yeah,
they're-
yeah.
I have an interesting number for you.
Okay.
How much, I just asked ChatGPT, how much buying power do you think the $2 million will have in 47 years? Less than $500,000. So that's how important it actually is. I remember thinking this in high school,
Yeah.
learning this, right? I mean, like, but inflation blows it up.
So the person who doesn't invest and has 250,000,
Exactly.
what's that worth? Like 20,000, right? So, yeah. So it is really hard. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard to do this, and I don't know anybody who does it. I didn't do it. I wish I had done it, but I didn't. But it just even if you can't put the full 7,000, like, you know, they're buying cars, absolutely, but they're buying depreciating assets, and you need cars. We all need cars, right? We talked about that maybe last week. I mentioned it. It was in my notes if I didn't say it. But cars are one of your budget busters, right? Because they're depreciating assets. So yeah. So in terms of, you know, back to the question, what's the best way to invest for future retirement? Would be slow and steady. You know, maybe index funds or asset allocation funds that kind of grab all the different asset allocations, so you're well kind of covered off. Like the one exchange traded fund that I have purchased, it owns 10,000 companies. Like, you've covered most of the market, right? So that's with just having one exchange traded fund. It's kind of like a mutual fund, and I can explain that more if you'd like. But the one has exposure to 10,000 companies. So it's like, if you put all your investment in one stock, like, you know, Microsoft or Apple or Tesla, some of these bigger companies, if that company were to go bankrupt, you'd lose all your money, right? So that's why you diversify as well. And you want to be in some sort of mutual fund or exchange traded fund that you kind of cover a broad range. So you want to diversify as part of the best way to invest.
I have a question back to
Yeah.
your table there.
Yeah.
Would you, assuming your house, assume your house is an investment account.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, the capital gain similarly to a TFSA would be sheltered in your house as a primary residence, but you're also inflation proof because it's an asset. So would you prefer to invest in your house and build the value of your house over a TFSA?
Well, houses are assets, but they also have costs associated with them, right? So even though generally a house is a good investment, I would say generally buying a house is a good investment. Not everybody does. Some people will rent their whole lives, and actually mathematically people can work out that renting is actually a good thing if you invest your money that you would have otherwise spent on a house, which again, this is some of these hypothetical questions, but investing in a house I think is good. Like it's generally a good option, but I wouldn't do that to the detriment of not utilizing a tax-free savings account.
And just to your point, like a lot of people, it seems like these days can't do both, right? So if you
Yes.
have to pick one, it's almost like more bang for your buck on a house because at least you have somewhere to live. Versus being homeless and having a TFSA, right?
Yeah. So I think some of the challenges that you run into.
And no car as well.
Yeah. But at 65, you're going to be
Just
loaded.
ring up by the Harveys and at least
That's
sit down.
right. Yeah, I can get you a burger with bacon on it, and
Order everything on the menu. Good.
it was comical. He just kept going. He just kept ordering.
In our generation, we were clearly brought up not to have debt and stuff. So that was our goal, to pay off our house as soon as we could. So we didn't even think about investing until our house was paid off. In this market nowadays, like people aren't going to be able to pay off their mortgages very easy. So are you suggesting that they're still putting money? I ideally, yes, if you could still take advantage of investments, but what is better?
So later in the presentation is where I'll get to that specifically, but the quick answer is if you have debt outside of your mortgage, that's what you want to take care of first, right? And then once you have only mortgage debt, then in the Ramsey baby steps, they would say that's when you start to do a little bit of a couple things. You're going to start putting away for retirement, 15% of your income. You need to think about potentially putting into RESPs and paying your house down, your mortgage, at an accelerated rate. So those three kind of take place at the same time based on the person and how much money you have available to put into that. So yeah, there's just something nice about not being in debt. So there is, paying your house off early is absolutely wonderful. It frees up that payment that you would otherwise have to potentially be utilized for all kinds of different options that you can pray through. And it's fun to be in that spot, to be able to go, okay, what can we do with this now? Do we invest? Do we give more? Do we, where do we want our heart to go, right? With that extra cash. So, so yes, a house is generally a good option. There have been times where people have bought too much, right? And that's where you buy a house that's bigger than what you need. So in the end, yes, you might have it, but you've taken a long time and a lot of interest to get to that spot where, if you stay within your means with a house, then you're probably going to do very well that way. And some see it as an investment and they're okay going into massive debt because that house is going to be in Toronto, it's going to be worth X amount of dollars even 3 years from now. And, but again, if it's your primary residence, if you're paying that off, it's going to be good in the end. And it is appreciating, which cars don't, but houses generally do. Yeah, unless something major happens, factories close in a town or something like that, and people all move, and there's a lot floods the market. There's a lot of things that can happen, but generally, a house is a good option for sure. Yeah, but I wouldn't do it to the detriment of my TFSA. So and again, everybody's situation is different. Like you can't just have a blanket like you always do this, because I don't know your circumstances and you don't know mine, right? So it's like you have to take a look at it individually and say what's the best option. Yeah. It's hard to time the market. I kind of talked a little bit about this. People don't do what they rationally should do, like buy low and sell high. So it's best to just buy consistently. If you're going to try and time the market, where this happens is, for example, you sell your business. You're getting ready to retire. You sell your business. You got a lump sum of cash. What do you do with that? And there's been a pile of studies, and if you ever want to get nerdy about this, there is a ton of studies on this stuff. Do you put it in the whole amount right now, wherever the market's at? Like the market's high right now, so if you put it in now and it starts to go down, you're gonna be like, oh, I should have just put in half of it, right? Or, this is where you need to get some advice. But having a big lump sum at the end is different than kind of working through life, and putting away where you can. It's hard to time the market. People who try to time the market, even the people who get paid to do this, don't do a great job of this. So just consistently put in. I mentioned index investing or asset allocations, just so you kind of have a good exchange trade. Does everybody know the difference between an exchange traded fund and a mutual fund? No idea. Okay. So mutual funds are a collection of stocks. You buy a mutual fund that usually your advisor will ask you what kind of risk you're interested in, whether you want low risk, medium risk, or high risk, basically. And then you would buy they would build a combination of your risk tolerance and buy a mutual fund, which is just a bunch of stocks from companies that they put together. Actively managed, but you pay fees for that. An exchange traded fund is similar to a mutual fund, in my understanding. It is lower. They buy companies, they buy stocks as well. So the exchange traded funds that I have are all a bunch of stocks that that particular fund is bought. It's not as actively managed, but you pay less fees also on an exchange traded fund. So they have these, they're called management expense ratios. So if you have mutual funds in Canada, you're going to pay generally anywhere from 2 to 2.5% on whatever you have. So say you have $100,000 in investments that are in mutual funds, you're likely going to pay, 2,500 a year, regardless of how the stock, regardless of how you do that year, you're going to pay 2.5% to your investor and also to the company that they work for and also to the mutual fund company, right? So everybody gets a little piece of that pie, but it's about 2 to 2.5%. So that's kind of your overall fees would be about 2.5%. With exchange traded funds, it's going to vary. Some of them are very ultra low, like under 0.25%. Some are a little bit higher. You can get robo investing, which is kind of like they take your risk tolerance and then they build a portfolio for you and they kind of do it and they reallocate each year. So they have all kinds of options, but an exchange traded fund generally isn't actively managed like a mutual fund, but you also don't pay the fees that you pay on a mutual fund. Sometimes it's worth paying somebody who knows what they're doing, right? Like you pay people, to, if you want to be fit, you're going to pay somebody to help you be fit, right? They give you coaching and guidance and advice. So it's not necessarily that you should choose to buy ETFs because they're cheaper in terms of the expense ratios. But at the same time, and you may not be comfortable doing that on your own, and that's why people go to a financial advisor who's going to do that, and you have to pay somebody to do that. But there are fee-for-service financial advisors too, who you pay them up front for advice, and they have no connection. They get no money from what you invested. They are giving you advice on what you should be investing in. And so there's a disconnect between my advice and my benefit. So if I'm a financial advisor and you want to buy a mutual fund for me, maybe I steer you to this company because I got to get over a threshold where I get an extra bonus. I don't know. Like I'm just throwing things out here. It happens in business where, if you get enough business here, they give you a better kickback. You get an extra 0.3% or something. So you're going to maybe push some of your clients into that specific mutual fund that may not be best for them, but overall it's good. It's not terrible, but it's just, whereas if you went to a fee-for-service only advisor, they're going to advise you on what to do. You pay them a lump sum up front. They decide whatever that is that you pay them, $1,000 or $5,000 if they make up a big plan for you, and that's the cost. And then you invest that money, right? So there's a couple different options, but most people won't go for a fee-for-service financial advisor because you're not going to feel confident enough to go and then do what they say or how do I now do that, right? That's why you pay somebody to do it for you. But just know that there are costs, and so that's kind of the difference between some of those options. I don't know if I've explained that totally perfectly for everyone, but sometimes it's worth paying people money to invest for you because they're smart and they're good. Other times it may not be to your advantage to pay somebody 2.5%. There's the property, David. Can come with some headaches, but generally is appreciating and is generally good. No crypto, no meme coins. The other thing that I didn't mention, but in terms of timing the market, most people know that you should buy low and sell high, but it's really hard to do that. So you have to battle your emotions and allow common sense, which can be rare when the markets are crashing. So COVID-19 sent a little shockwave through the old stock market. How long did it take for the stock market to come back? Because it came back. So there's a couple different terminologies for the stock market. There's a dip, that's just a little one, right? There's a correction, that's a little bit bigger of one, and they have percentages for all these. And then there's kind of a crash. And COVID-19 was a crash. It went down significantly. The S&P fell 34%, very quickly. So what you had is worth 34% less now, within a short amount of time. People were selling. But what's happening is when it's going down, people are selling, right? Because they're thinking, oh, I'm gonna lose all my money if it keeps going down. But is that actually rationally what you should be doing? When it's going down, you should be buying. But some people go, I'm gonna time it. I'm gonna wait till it bottoms out and then I'm gonna buy everything then. Well, you never know when that is. So you think, oh, I'm losing all my money, so I'm gonna sell, which is wrong. So people sell too late and buy back in too late. And then they lose money on it all. They'd have been better off just to leave their money where it was. And 34% it went down. The S&P TSX, so the Toronto Stock Exchange, went down 37%. The S&P 500 in the States bounced back to its previous highs by November of 2020. So from March to November, it was back. And before the end of the year, it had made 15.6%. Leave your money in, ride it out, and it came back within, and I think it was only 56 days, somewhere in there, where it went down and then it started coming back up. It wasn't very long. And they have statistics on all this stuff. If you want to read up on all the stock market crashes and how long it takes to come back. But people are thinking, oh my money is gone. Like it's going down, I got to get out. But they get out too late. And then it starts going back up and they're like, oh, is it going to, because it does this. It's not like this and then this. It goes down and up and then down. And is it going back up? No, it's going back down. And then finally it starts taking off. People have a hard time timing the market. So it's just interesting how we don't think rationally when we should be. So just a couple thoughts.
Why you say no crypto?
Oh, it's so volatile. You can make a lot of money, but a lot of people have lost a lot of money. And I think it's more fleeting than most of the other things. So I myself, and I'm just talking for me, I would say no. I wouldn't be buying into it. There's people who could convince you of it. I'm almost certain of it. And there's people probably in here who have crypto. You can make a lot of money, but you can also lose a lot of money. It's very volatile. So I would just sooner stay away from the volatility. That's just for me. In terms of Christian investments, in the States they have, I didn't really know, this was a question that came up, but they have this thing called the Timothy Plan in the US, and they don't buy stocks from like alcohol or tobacco companies or those who support abortion, like all that sort of stuff. So kind of the things that we would hold dear to. They have something in the US where you can purchase into buying stocks from them. I didn't see anything quite like it from Canadian companies. There was one that kind of had mentioned a little bit about that. It was one of the, like a Mennonite investment company. But there wasn't as much information anyways about Canadian companies that were promoting that as much as I did see from a couple of the American companies. Again, you talk to people, there's like find somebody who you trust if you have an investor, because even if they say they're a Christian, like I know people who have lost a pile of money with Christian people. So it's not just, oh, I trust this guy, he said he's a Christian, right? No, like just be wise, right? Yeah. So I don't have a great answer for a Canadian company that is investing in all of those things. I wasn't able to locate. Does anybody know of one that, yeah?
Well, we're with Kindred Credit Union, which used to be the Mennonite Savings.
Oh, okay.
And they do invest through all like socially good companies. So yeah, it is one option.
Okay.
One of their
Waterloo.
one of their investment things provides mortgages to church buildings.
Oh, okay.
So you're kind of contributing to the building of churches and stuff. Anyway.
Okay, so there's one. So Kindred Financial, maybe? If you looked up Kindred, I'm sure it'd pop up.
Stewards Canada is much the same.
Stewards?
Stewards Canada.
Okay.
Stewards.
Like a good steward?
Yeah.
D.
Yes. Okay, stewards. All right, so a couple options. Yeah, do your research and And yeah, I think there's some value to for sure looking into that. All right, so this was a couple questions kind of combined into one here in terms of balancing legitimate lifestyle versus generous giving, balancing giving or giving sacrificially in a legitimate lifestyle, or the difference between hoarding and being good stewards, strike a balance between saving and investing for the future versus using God's money to bless others. Now, is there a point where a focus on our savings and investings is a reflection of not fully trusting that God will provide? There was a time several years back where it's fun to give. I think it's fun to give anyways. It can be exciting to be on the giving end and to see what God does with that. And I remember I said to Rachel, I think we should increase our giving by 1% every year. And we had young kids at the time, and so we did this for about 2 years. And as we're increasing our giving, Rachel asked me one time wisely, she's like, so we still owe on a mortgage. And it was just nice and polite. Do you think it's wise to continue to give more when we still owe? And I was like, well, that's a very good question. Because it can be fun to give, and it can be fun to be a part of being generous and on that side of things. But at the same time, we still had a mortgage, and yet it's trying to balance that giving and being generous with what we owe. So clawed that back. Actually, I think we maybe stayed where we were and then just said, okay, we'll keep it here until we are debt free, and then we can start to increase. So get out of debt. Live within our means or below our means if possible. In terms of balancing what we need to do, I think it's important for us to be out of debt. The scripture is clear that there is, there's a bondage to being in debt that we talked about last week. The more we give, the more our heart leans toward generosity. And like the scripture last week, so balancing that in terms of saving for the future and giving generously now. This is something I think that is a prayerful endeavor, especially if you're out of debt and you want to prepare for the future. That's wise. You think of Joseph. What if Joseph just trusted God? Like, you have no faith because you're not trusting God. Well, God clearly directed him to save in advance so that there would be provision later on. And that's wise. That's not just living on faith. That's a phony faith in one sense. Trusting that God will provide later when he's provided now as well, right? For you to, and it's not like you're creating your own nest egg. I'm not suggesting that where you're totally confident in what you've amassed. That would be wrong. But there is a balance, striking that balance between a legitimate lifestyle, and that will vary. Please allow Christian freedom to run a little bit here between what you think is maybe legitimate and what maybe another person thinks is legitimate. There's going to be a little bit of gray area, I believe there. I don't think there's one standard that says this, your house can't be any more than this number of square feet. And if it is, you're sinning. Like, it's not that clear. But that doesn't mean you can't have conversations and such about kind of what that looks like, but prayerfully, because there's some pretty rich believers that have massive homes and estates and boats and yet give a ton of their money away. Very generous. And they are what I would call a river, where God chooses to channel money through you, right? As opposed to being a dam, where it comes to you and stops right there, and you keep it. I want to be a river. I want to be trusted by the Lord to be able to channel resources through Rachel and I, that we wouldn't keep it for ourselves, but would utilize that for the kingdom. And so I think there's some prayerful thought of striking a balance between that legitimate lifestyle and generous giving. And if you have to err, giving is fun. I don't know, when you're there. But yeah, that's a conversation you have together as a couple, if you're a couple, or if not, you make that decision before the Lord. But yeah, I always look back to Joseph and think Joseph took time to prepare for the advance. Now he was working through a dream as well. Like it wasn't like I don't think any of you probably, or I don't get dreams like that and interpret them. So it may not be like quite as clear as that, but at the same time, take the principle of it all that he did plan ahead.
It is definitely a hard thing. How do you, because there's so many variables, like how long are we going to live? What's our health going to be like? What's cost of living going to be? So, I mean, I've worked in the financial industry my whole working life, and it's really hard to find where you're being wise and saving, paying off debt and then saving, and where you're starting to hoard. Because I think a lot of us like that sense of security that comes with being somewhat self-sufficient, right? And that's a hard balance. So I'm glad I'm not down at the bottom of the totem pole anymore, that I don't have to worry about that so much. But it's a hard balance. Like, so it's not easy to come to the decisions about all of that all the time.
It's true. You mentioned about how long you're going to live. Like you want to have enough where you're not dependent on others. But I would definitely consider giving more of your money away than you think you should as an older person. And the reason is then you get the blessing of seeing where that goes. You get to see the blessing of what God might do with what he has entrusted to you and giving it away, as opposed to amassing a whole bunch and then letting your estate decide that. And I'm all in favor of helping out the younger generation, not to their detriment. Don't make it so easy for them that they don't work. But boy, I've said to my parents, like, now's the time. If you want to give us money, I don't need it years from now. This is the busiest, most expensive time for us. And if you want to see that, now's the time. And I'm the one that benefits from that, for sure, and my kids. But it sets us up for the next generation to be able to do that as well. So maybe we're putting into our first home savings accounts for our kids so that they might have a house, right? So there's benefits that can come, when some of this happens. So I would encourage, why wait till you die and then decide what happens? Give it while you're alive. That's when you actually give in faith. It's not when you're dead. There's no giving in faith when you're dead, just so you know. It's not in faith at all. But when you're alive, that's when you're giving in faith, which Abel was commended for. Yeah, when you're dead, it's just, you're done. When you're alive, it's given in faith. If that helps. Yes?
Probably about 15 years ago, Ian and I went to Founders Week in Chicago at Moody. And we were only there because the church sent us, but it was where a lot of the donators would come together for a week and have great speakers and stuff. And they did an offering on the last night, and it was over $11 million in the offering. And I thought someone wrote a check bigger than Ann and I did, but but you realize, yes, there are people that are like you would describe as rivers that probably make a lot of money, but they give a lot of money away as well.
Yeah. In that book I showed you last week by Randy Alcorn, Giving is the Good Life, there's so many examples of companies that have been that just give so much away of what they make, right? And they're just, it's of the Lord, and there's a lot of examples of that. But it's not even that amount. It's more so even just for us who don't make millions and millions to give away, or maybe you don't have a business that you can just continually give. It's faithful with what you have. That's all that matters. It's not the money. God doesn't need our money. He does not need our money. He can accomplish everything without us. But as we get to participate in that, it's kind of fun. Okay, I got to scoot here. This is just a couple of dangers of being rich. I'm going to pass over this pretty quickly. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom. This is important. The greatest danger of wealth is the illusion that we don't need God. Okay? If your wealth or what you've amassed makes you feel confident in where you are and who you are, and you're secure because of that, please give all your money away and be dependent on Him. Because that illusion of we got it I got this, is detrimental to your faith. And yeah. I'm going to move along. Sorry, folks. The Bible's tough on the rich people. Okay.
Can I share something about that last thing?
Yes.
This is a really interesting stat that a friend of mine had about money. I'm gonna get it wrong. There was this big survey done. How much money do you need to make in order to feel like you are? Okay, start this way. There was a couple questions. One was, how much more money does the average people you need to make to be enough? So they surveyed this huge survey. This is a friend in university when he heard this. It didn't matter how much people made. It was like 10% more.
Yeah.
So the person making like 20,000 McDonald's was 10% more. The person making like 150 was 10% more. The other was, how much do you need to make to feel like you're financially successful?
2 more?
No. It had nothing to do with the amount you made at all. It had to do with how much your friends made.
Comparison.
Your peer group. It had to do with how much your peer group made. Interesting.
Yeah.
This really reveals like mostly heart issues.
Mm-hmm. Clearly,
It's
yeah.
not about the dollars.
It's not about the actual numbers.
It's not about the numbers.
It's perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple quotes. I'll go through these quickly, but C.S. Lewis, Christ says, "Give me all. I don't want so much of your time and so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you." And then Pastor J.D. Greer, God works through availability, not ability. He doesn't need your ability, your money, or your talents. He calls only for your complete and total obedience. The point is not how much you give, but whether you give what he tells you to give. You can scarcely overestimate what God will accomplish through simple obedience. All right, so the Ramsey steps really quickly. The first step is you save $1,000 for an emergency starter fund. Once you have a starter fund of $1,000, you move on to step 2, which is to pay off all debts except for your house using the debt snowball. I talked a little bit about that last week. They recommend taking your smallest amount of debt, whatever that, say you have 5 debts, you take the lowest amount that you owe, that one, pay the minimum on all the other ones, and put all the extra on that one until it's done. So if you owed $50 on this one a month, once that one's done, you take the 50 and move it on to the next one. It's a snowball effect. You start to see some of your debts getting, you're accumulating, you're getting rid of some of your debts, and you get some momentum and excitement. But again, in this stage, it is like bare bones. You don't eat out. This is their teaching. You don't eat out. No extras until you get that debt paid off. Once you get all of those debts paid off, and that can take, and you can only do this for probably a year to a year and a half. If you are cutting most things out, it's really hard to do this for 5 years. It's almost impossible. You got to sell stuff. If you're that deep in debt, you gotta make some other choices. If you get all that paid off except for your house, the next step is to save 3 to 6 months of expenses in a fully funded emergency fund. And you keep that in something liquid, like a bank account-ish type of thing that you can get to very quickly if you needed it. And that's just in case of emergency. So you'll never go in debt again. That's the goal, is once you're out of that debt, you're not going back. You have things covered off. And then once you have that fully funded emergency fund, and that will depend on a lot of things, like 3 to 6 months. The range is big because it depends on your circumstance specifically. Like if you don't have coverage, if you're sick at work, you don't have any short-term sickness or long-term sickness, then you're going to have probably lean more toward the 6 month than the 3 month, right? So it depends on your circumstance and situation. So once you're there, then steps 4, 5, and 6 kind of take place at the same time, and that's invest 15% of your household income in retirement, save for your children's education, and pay off your house early. So that would just depend on each person individually. And then lastly, step 7 is to build wealth and to give generously. That's the baby steps in a nutshell. They have a whole course on that, taking you through all of that. But that's just the general practical layout. And your house, like they have practicals and all of that. Your house can't be any more than your mortgage payment can't be any more than 25% of your take-home pay. for no more than a 15-year fixed mortgage. So if your house is more than that, your house is too big. So find a house that you can get a 15-year fixed mortgage where your mortgage payment will be no more than 25% of your take home. Those are just some of the practical things for that. Any questions about that specifically? I know I ran through that like really quickly. Emphasis there is obviously debt first. Get rid of the debt. And it's amazing the number of conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks with people at work in different places where it's coming up, and it's just like you just talk, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've got this debt and this debt," and you're like, "Let's do something about it," right? All right, this is probably the part that I resonate most with in terms of how do we make this work, okay? We get this teaching. How do we make it work? Like, how do we actually, do you hire me as a financial coach because I'm a new financial coach? Maybe, but no, that's not the answer. The answer is going to be found in accountability. So, the American Society of Training and Development did a study regarding achieving success, okay? So, we talked last week, I actually talked last week about having somebody who you are accountable to, right? Is there anybody who knows and can hold you accountable that you're a faithful giver? And remember I talked to you, there's a guy that I had years ago that could take my T4, my giving, I can tell him whatever else we gave that wasn't recorded and kind of, are you faithful? So kind of along that line, but the idea is that in this study, if you just merely having a goal, in your mind you think, I'd like to do this. You have a 10% more likely to complete that task if you have a goal. If you consciously decide to do it, you're consciously deciding to do it, 25%. I am going to do this. I have a goal and I'm thinking about it and I'm going to do it. 25% better chance of success. Assigning a timeline, so you actually jot down how you're going to do this, 40%. Making a more comprehensive plan, it increases to 50% more likely. Committing to somebody else, telling your neighbor that you're going to do this, it jumps you up to 65%. But here's the one. Weekly, consistent check-in with somebody. 95% chance of success. For somebody who will meet with you and ask you how you're doing. Because we are not as accountable to ourselves as we are to others. And this goes for finances, it goes for anything. Scripture reading, prayer, loving your spouse, whatever you want to be held accountable for, whatever you set up as your what you want to succeed at, when you have somebody, and this is why I say it's not a financial coach, it's somebody who you know, right? Who is invested in your life that you can have these good, real conversations with. And they can call you up and say, hey, how's that going? So when you're thinking, I'm in London today, I'm going to go to Chick-fil-A. But you know you're not supposed to eat out because the budget isn't there for eating out right now. And you know that Ian's going to ask me if I went to Chick-fil-A. So I'm going to be like, phew.
That place is a ripoff.
So Ian is not the guy I want to Chick-fil-A. So it's really, really important that if you want to see success in moving forward to honor God with your finances, that you can't do it by yourself. You can't. The likelihood of success dwindles significantly if you want to try and do it on your own. And it's true in our spiritual walk, right? And it's no different. And in fact, I think our finances are probably even a little bit more because we're so guarded about, not telling anybody how much you make and, we have to have somebody with us along for the ride to try and maybe it's to be more generous. You don't even have debt anymore and you just want to be more generous and you have somebody just come alongside you and say, what have you been researching lately? What is God placing on your heart for you to invest in financially or with your time? Right? It's just, and I love I've talked about accountability for a lot of years, but this study is really interesting that it pounds it home, not even from a Christian perspective, just people in general. But then how can we utilize that for the glory of God? And it's the choice that we will invite somebody into this process. And you can say, well, I have my spouse, maybe. Yep. But I would encourage you to go outside of that, because you're both in the same money thing. So go find somebody who you can trust. Who you'll say, hey, listen, will you just ask me? Text me. I know that you're going to ask me, so it affects my behavior. And then walk through, make a plan, do all those things prior to that, but then find that somebody who's gonna hold you accountable. I think that's the key for you moving to the next level. Whichever baby step you're on, moving to the next level to continue to honor God comes through, not by yourself, but with somebody, a team maybe even. People praying together and seeing what God might do. So, yeah. Any comments? Any questions?
About the accountability, I was just saying to Ben, sometimes you don't want to talk about finances because I feel like there's one of two things. Either you're not in a great financial situation, you don't want people to know that, or you're in a great financial situation, you don't want to be boastful about that, right? So it's like, how do you find the right people that you're not gonna, you don't want to make people feel bad, or you don't want people to see you in a certain way or whatever. So that's I feel like that's my hang up anyways, about not sharing about where we're at financially.
Yeah.
It's hard, but you gotta let go of that.
Yeah.
That's emotion, yes, that's right.
It's emotion,
the emotion
for
of
sure.
finances.
And I think to a certain degree there can be pride involved in that, right? In a negative way, where maybe if we're upside down on a few things financially, we're talking to somebody is actually a great thing because it gets you out of that, hiding it. It's like any sin. Sin has power in secrecy. Sin has a lot of power in secrecy. You let that out, confess it, the power's gone. And the same can be true with our finances. Yeah, we might have a lot of credit card debt, and the first time you tell somebody, they go, "What? And you pay 28% a month?" And then the shock factor goes away, and you're like, "Okay, but we're here to work on this, right?"
So if you're the person that's being told that, watch your face.
Yeah.
What? You're like, oh, okay. Practice in the mirror a few times.
There is a no judgment zone, right? If somebody's coming for help, boy, oh boy, I've done stupid things. I invested in some dumb things. I lost money during COVID. I also bought things at COVID that made money, but man, I did some dumb things where investing wise, I've been there. I've done dumb stuff, right? So that qualifies me to be a part of any conversation, I suppose. I've done dumb stuff. And just, it is an element of pride. And of course, if you're on the other side where you're like wanting some encouragement on how to give away thousands of dollars and you're talking with somebody who's literally deep, deep, deep in debt, that may not be the right person you want holding you accountable. So maybe you feel it out a little bit, right? Just throwing a little bit out there to find that person. But, I wouldn't just ask a stranger, right? Like, hopefully you have an established relationship with somebody who you could kind of open that up a little bit with. But you're right. You have to overcome that and say, this is not for me to say, look at me. Either way, it's, I want to move forward by the grace of God to honor Him. And I think that's true, like with lots of other sins, secret sins in people's lives. You got to confess it, get it out, and work on that from there. And yeah, I think there's a process, though. You're right, of coming to grips with that and saying it's okay. Yeah, that's what I actually studied in my seminary. Research was all on why is it such a secret? Because I probably tell you more than I should. Well, not that I should, but I don't really care in some regards. But I don't know why it's so secretive. Right? I would say, you know what? Not that we have to flaunt where we are with things, but just let's work towards finding a solution to honor God. And yeah, so.
On the 7 tips, the one about education, I mean, the way I grew up, at least, is my parents were there to provide low-interest loans, but there wasn't any giveaways. We had to work for it, and that lesson kind of stuck with me because I felt like I had to work for it, therefore I worked hard to do well. So that was my plan with our kids, also because I'm cheap and I don't want to get Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, no, not at all. You know, if everything's given to you, you know, and you never really have had to work, you know, you might set your kids up to be a bit slothful, right? Like in terms of their work ethic. But if your kids are working hard, man, like all my kids work hard, and they've been instilled with that desire to work hard. And I think if there's a way that I can help them out without ruining them and their character, then I want to try and do that. But I wouldn't at the expense of that. I wouldn't say, well, I gave your brother or sister this much, so you're going to get that too. But yet you're totally, you know, it's kind of like if you had multiple, and there's a whole lot of things we could talk about, but even, you know, as you're older, you know, do you give all your kids the same amount when you die? You have a child that's strung out on drugs. You're going to give them $250,000? I don't know. It's the Lord's money, right? Think through some of these things, right? But if you're going to do that, because the standard is everybody gets equal amounts, but if you're not going to do that, please have a conversation with people so that you don't set your kids up for fights, right? If you're in that stage of life, communicate. They may not like it, but you know, are you going to give the Lord's money to something that you know is going to be wasted probably within a year and may even kill them? Right? Think through, these are things that you think through in terms of retirement and passing on. And that's why I say spend it while you're alive in faith. There's so much more blessing. Then you're actually, you know, setting up those treasures in heaven. When you die, you're not sending them on ahead. I think it ends when we die. I don't think we get to keep sending them after we're dead with the money that we never parted with in faith. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a balance there. I think some parents think, you know, I made it on my own. I got to make my kids make it on their own. But the Bible does say the person who doesn't look after the needs of his immediate family is worse than an infidel. So I think there's a strong instruction in Scripture that we're to meet the needs of our family. We don't want, like you said, to make them slothful by giving them too much. But the kids now are growing up in a much different world than we grew up in, and it's going to be much more difficult. So our primary responsibility is still to help them out, to get started, and instruct them in these sound biblical principles in the process.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. Yeah, because the way your parents grew up is probably different the way that you were even brought up, right? Like they probably softened compared to the way they were. You know what I mean? Like I don't actually know that, but like I think of some of the ways that like previous generations were raised. But that's something that, again, it's not black and white, but you pray through that, right? And desire to seek the Lord's wisdom and talk to other people as well, and then you make your own decision and you stand before the Lord with that and be confident and comfortable with those decisions. But they're not just simple and easy. You have to work through it a little bit, for sure. Yeah. I have a little 1-minute video here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it up or not, but it won't work through my presentation, so let me just try this.
The problem is, Craig, the sound doesn't come through. Unless you,
No, okay, so this is, being dead is hard, being financially disciplined is hard. Choose your heart. So this is less exciting than what the video would have been.
Put your picture up there.
A careless life without God is hard. A life dedicated to God is hard. Choose your heart. You see, life is never easy and it's hard by nature, and the only thing you have to do is choose your heart. So choose wisely. Yeah, choose which way you want to go. If you want to stay in debt, it's hard. It's the burden of being in debt. And is it hard to get out of debt? Yeah, you got to make hard choices. When I was losing weight, was it hard to say no? Of course it was. Right? But I had to make those choices. And so you have to choose whether I wanted to continue where I was or whether I wanted to make choices and decisions that were just as, either way, it's hard. So why not choose the hard that's going to bring you to where you need to be before the Lord? And in relation to finances, it's just to honor Him in all those things. And yeah, so hopefully over the course of our time here, yeah, we make choices to be good stewards. And there's going to be days where you're going, this is hard. But I think it's well worth it, right? To honor the Lord. And so, yeah. Any last questions before I close this off? Well, thank you for sticking around 2 Sundays in a row and joining us here and the input, and hopefully you're able to pull something away. So let's pray. Father, we're just so thankful for your provision. And Lord, we pray for wisdom. Not all these decisions are super clear and easy all the time, but just pray that we would really desire to honor you with what you've given us, that we would see our role as a steward as so important, that we would steward what you've given to us for your glory. And if there's changes that we need to make, I pray that we would find somebody to come alongside us, to provide that little bit of extra accountability for us to make those decisions and those hard choices to honor you. We're thankful for how generous you are and the example that you set for us in your Son, sending him to the cross for us on our behalf. There's no greater gift than that. And so we say thank you, and we are grateful for your provision. And yeah, I just pray that we would be those who in faith trust you and desire to honor you in all things. In Jesus' name, amen.